We have quite a few presentations to get through, and then we also have an interactive portion where we want to get your ideas on this. So welcome to this session on a PID exchange, and it's the idea of a curated information resource for PID adopters. My name is Daniel Bangert. I'm the National Open Research Coordinator at the Digital Repository of Ireland. And this is a joint session between the National PIDs Strategy Interest Group, which is brand new, and the Working with PIDs in Tools Interest Group. So I'll kick off to talk about our work under the National PIDs Strategy Interest Group, which grew out of previous work under a working group, which has just wrapped up. And then we'll discuss the idea of a PID exchange and why this has arisen. Just to say that the impetus for this session is that we recognize the need for PID groups to work together. And we're coming from this from quite different perspectives. For example, the PID Strategies Working Group is really looking at the broader policy perspective or strategy, looking at the big picture, and PIDs and Tools are looking at, I guess, what's happening on the ground underneath the hood and how we build the roads and connect the dots between PIDs, the instruments, the services, tools, and so on. So an idea that emerged through discussions between the groups was a common need for something like a PID exchange, a way to exchange and communicate key relevant information for PID adopters. Okay, I think some co-chairs are also on the call or joining us online. So I'm Daniel Bangert. This presentation is also co-authored by Natasha Simons, Shauna Sadler, and Christopher Brown from the UK, Canada, and Australia. So firstly, it's a welcome and an introduction to the idea of this interest group, and we want to facilitate exchange between those developing or delivering national PID strategies to improve the coordination and alignment of these efforts across the globe. As I mentioned, it's transitioned from a former working group with the same name. It's recently endorsed by the RDA Council, and this is our first meeting. And it will maintain and build on the outputs of the former working group, which you may be a member of already. So firstly, if you haven't joined the interest group, please join us. Basically, we came to the end of our cycle and recognized that there was a need to continue this discussion under an interest group, and hence the formation of the group. I'll talk you through some of the outputs of the working group so you can get an idea of what's been achieved so far and where we want to go. So at the end of our cycle, we had two main outputs, a guide and a checklist called Pathways to National PID Strategies. This was to facilitate uptake and alignment, and it was based on case studies that we'd gathered over an 18-month period from Australia, Canada, Czechia, Finland, Germany, Korea, New Zealand, the Netherlands, and the UK. So those were integrated, collated into an output, a guide, and then a short form of that was created summarized in a checklist. So what were the key findings or key messages out of that work? So firstly, there's a great deal of interest in national PID strategies and approaches, and there are many more of them coming on board in recent months and years. Basically, there's no single cookie cutter approach to developing this. Every region or national context has taken a slightly different path, but there are some critical components. These include a clear value proposition with use cases, a group or organization with responsibility for driving strategy development, an open, inclusive, iterative process that involves all stakeholders, and an accompanying roadmap that outlines practical steps for implementation. And the last point there is that between this strategic development and the PID providers, we need that relationship to build and continue for success. So the outputs you can find on Zenodo and via the National PID Strategies Working Group website, and they can be used to inform the development of your national PID strategy, to help develop a roadmap to accompany this strategy, to help align with international initiatives in this area, to facilitate stakeholder engagement, and to connect, communicate, and collaborate with others who are on a similar path. So we'd like to thank RDA Tiger and the team, Ari, Najla, Alex, Ryan, and so on, who have supported this working group, especially in the dissemination of its outputs. So they've produced a white paper which summarizes the work in 3 or 4 pages. I think there might be copies of it around, or you can access it on the website, and also a nice visualization of the checklist. You can see those there. And the checklist, for example, has 15 points. So it goes through a value proposition, stakeholder analysis, use cases, leadership, scope, a roadmap, vision, funding, consultation, working groups, submission process, a communications plan, benchmarking, monitoring, and international engagement. And it's not that all of these need to be checked off, but they provide hints as to where others have found success and where you might start. So we've now launched the National PID Strategies Interest Group. Please join as a member. You can do that very easily on the RDA website. If you're not there already, very welcome to join the discussions within this group. In terms of what we plan to do over the next 12 months or so, we have a number of goals and underneath some ideas of activities to help facilitate those goals. So the first is to facilitate information exchange between those developing or delivering national PID strategies, similar to what we've done already. And we can do this within interest group meetings, between plenaries, and share presentations on new or updated case studies. As we know, this area is evolving and evolving quite quickly, and we want to keep track and also update the community. So the second goal there is to facilitate engagement between developers of these strategies and international PID providers such as ORCID, DataCite, and Crossref. So activities to support this could be focused conversations between members and PID providers and explore opportunities to work better together. The third goal there is to develop the value proposition for national PID strategies overall, as well as its parts, which might be grant identifiers, different types of identifiers, and so on, that can be reused and adapted by the community. So we would like ideas around which areas to focus on. They might be, for example, value proposition development, governance and service models, guidance materials on the types of entities or PIDs that could be assigned and what purpose they serve, how to benchmark PID adoption levels, different techniques or what's worked, developing a capability maturity model, which is another way to go, mapping the policy landscape or creating a website or something similar to a strategic information sharing or exchange. The fourth goal there is to keep collecting case studies of national PID strategies from countries across the globe. We have 9 at the moment, but we know there are others in development, and we're in contact with other regions where these are developing. So we'd like to collect those, help disseminate them, and also where there have been changes in other national contexts to update the information that we've already published. And then lastly, maintain the guide and checklist that was produced under the working group, and we can do that periodically through this interest group. So as I mentioned, there's a bit of a metaphor here, which Natasha has tried to illustrate, that we're looking on the left-hand side from the strategic big picture point of view, and the PIDs and tools are more like the car or what's under the hood, or how to drive from A to B. So we're delighted to have this session together. One last exciting announcement is save the date for you, for all the PID folks in the room and listening online. This is an event that's co-organised and supported by the National Library of Technology in Prague and the Australian Research Data Commons. It's called PID Fest, and that website is now live. There'll be more information about submissions and sponsorship coming soon, but we hope to see you there next year. That's June. It's the 11th, I think, to the 13th of June. Thank you very much, and I'll hand over to Rory.
Hi everyone. Thanks, Daniel. I'm Rory McNeil from ResearchBase, and I'm here to introduce the other half of the tag team, the Working with PIDs and Tools interest group. And the joint session actually emerged at, just seems like not that long ago in Gothenburg, when we had our first session at an RDA plenary. And people were saying, gee, you guys should be talking to the National PIDs Strategies Group. And we went to their session, they said, gee, you guys should be talking to the Working with PIDs and Tools group. So especially with their transition to an interest group, it seemed like a good time to have a joint session. So that's why we're here today. And it's great to have a chance to engage with them. So working with PIDs and tools, what's it all about? Well, the impetus to the group, you can see the four co-chairs, you can see online, and you can see actually Xiaoli is here as well. And Jens and Chris are not, unfortunately, not able to be with us today. But the idea was basically to say, well, there's a lot of work going on with PIDs at the policy level, like the National PID Strategies Group. The PIDs providers are doing a lot of things, and increasingly their activities are accelerating. But there's not really much discussion about, or not enough discussion, let's say, about how does this actually play out at the grassroots when you actually try to implement PIDs at the institution. There's some discussion at the institute, a fair amount of discussion how that works, say, if you're a university, an institution, trying to implement a PIDs implementation. But there's very little discussion about how PIDs incorporate with research tools. And in many cases, if not most cases, PIDs, the workflows that are involved with PIDs need to be incorporated, associated with the research tools that people are actually working with. So that is really the focus of that was the impetus to the founding of our group. And so workflows involve interoperability. So one of the key themes of things we've been looking at is interoperability between tools and infrastructures where we can leverage PID and metadata infrastructure, but in a way which maintains consistency as data and metadata passes between tools, between e-infrastructures. It's also meant to be looking at, meant to be a platform for research supporting service providers and PID open infrastructure organizations to outline use cases. So we're going to hear a use case in a minute, to explore challenges and to pull resources to provide reference and guidance to others going forward. And coming on to maybe the main topic of today, which is the potential PID Exchange Forum, it's meant to be a forum for dissecting the interoperability challenges through discussion of concrete case studies involving applications of PIDs to tools in multiple communities of practice. So rather than kind of going on about that at a theoretical level, I think it'll be a lot more appropriate for me to introduce my colleague Vida Plankheit, who's going to talk about a particular project which she and Xiaoli were involved in and led, which involved the implementation of a PID into a pool in an effort to enhance interoperability. Thank you.
All right, I have learned from watching other talks, the green button is what I need to use. Perfect. All right, so I'm Vida Plankheit, and I am not a researcher or even research adjacent, I'd say. I have a background in computer science, and then I moved into design, and I'm mostly user research, UI, UX, that kind of work, project design as well. And so it was really interesting for me to take part in this project where DataCite and RSpace focused on implementing something practically, because I'm quite used to the workflow of starting with user research and then design and some iteration and making a prototype. And it was interesting to see what kind of issues we encountered and also what went well. Yes, I've done this. Yeah, so the reason this project came about is that we got a grant from EOSC, Future, and RDA. It was called Enhancing Interoperability for Use of PIDs in Research Platforms. And so it was a collaboration between our two organizations. So you might be thinking, well, what is RSpace? I think you're less likely to be thinking, what is DataCite? I've never heard of that. So it's an integrated electronic lab notebook and a sample management system. So the focus is really on institutional research data management, and the idea that you're probably already using a lot of tools in your research process, whether in the preparation phase or the active phase or the output phase. And you're probably not wanting to adopt yet another tool that is different and doesn't interoperate. And so this is what we try to do. I'm going to use a very, very fancy thing. Look at that. So RSpace and RSpace inventory in here kind of takes part in the active research phase, but we pull from all of these different things, including, iRods and Argos and also DMPs, online cloud storage. And then we pull that in, not necessarily as an import, it's kind of linking to the different resources. So they still can be hosted on these platforms. You do some research, you might use chemical tools, programming, so on. You might, again, want to add references to those items. And then eventually you're going to output, hopefully, and there, PIDs, but also repositories and various interoperable formats. So that's kind of the idea we're going for. And so because of the fact that we have a pretty strong API, we thought, okay, well, it makes sense to maybe take one specific use case here and do that for this project in terms of PIDs. And so, yeah, we decided to take IGSNs, which are a PID for physical samples. It's based on DataCite's DOI schema, but just kind of provides recommendations on how to use it for IGSNs, right? And then RSpace inventory, so the sample management system. So the assumption is that researchers will be importing data as CSV from legacy systems, or maybe they'll be creating samples already within the inventory system, and they want to easily just add a PID, end up with a landing page that has the various metadata already from RSpace inventory. So the kind of simplest kind of core use case. And for that, we talked to a couple universities, mostly the Arctic University of Norway and Rotherham Research, which had similar workflows, but different enough that we were able to do some generalization work. One of them was mostly kind of agricultural field research, and the other one, this is going to show the extent of my research knowledge. They collected rocks in places, and then obviously they needed to tag those rocks and make sure that they were recorded properly. And different roles as well. So not just researchers that could tell us about the issues they have or what they need when they're using a tool, but also data stewards and institutional managers and all the different issues they might encounter. And yeah, I think it's pretty kind of self-explanatory that we wanted to understand through that what are the actual requirements for using sample identifiers and building actually a working prototype integration. And through the act of building it, seeing what we encounter as technical difficulties, issues with, let's say, collaboration or communication and interoperability and PIDs, and just kind of report on that. So one of the outputs is the fact that, we did build a prototype IGSN integration within inventory that supports the very core workflow of you enter some metadata, you register your IGSN, you publish the IGSN, and that's all done without leaving the inventory system, and things happen in the background in terms of interacting with DataCite, but the actual researcher doesn't need to see any of that. So just to give you some images, because I think it's easier to explain it that way. So here's a screenshot of the inventory system. You have, let's say, a list of different items. In this case, I'm viewing various fridges. And here I'm looking at a cupboard, and it has different attributes, and you can kind of create your own type of item. But let's say you're maybe, you're viewing a sample and you're viewing this kind of details panel where you're able to enter metadata or review it. You, on the identifier section, you'd actually click, okay, create new identifier. Automatically, that just pulls in specifically the DataCite recommended IGSN properties. So the reason why I was able to know that I should probably focus on these ones was because DataCite had a good documentation and recommendations on how to actually implement this. And all of these are pulled from actual existing properties within our space as much as possible. And because these are all automatically pulled and these are all the mandatory properties, that means that a researcher really only needs to click on create and then click on publish if they want to have an identifier like already kind of pre-made. And so it's the simplest kind of step to make sure that that's possible. Yeah, you can publish and that gives you a clear link and you know what the status of that item is. This is an example of a landing page that just takes all of the items that you filled in, both the mandatory, but also some optional properties. And for the optional properties, there was a lot of conversation of which ones do we implement. And I mean, ideally, you'd have some kind of layer of a data curator who'd be able to set up templates, right? Be able to say, okay, for this institution, for this department, I'd like to create, let's say, this field that has these properties. The default should be this. These should be the recommended values and have these extra layers for each kind of field, but that involves building a whole, obviously, templating functionality that supports that. So we decided to just go for the simplest option, which was implement a few of the IGSN recommended fields from DataCite, specifically geolocation, because when you're dealing with physical samples, you might want to input, where you found the thing, and trying to make sure that it's a one-to-one to the DataCite schema, right? And so here, for example, you can input point, place, which is just a text, an actual box coordinates, or a polygon editor, where you're able to describe the actual shape of, let's say, a field that you collected something from. Because that was the requirements that the various RDM managers told us about. But obviously, there's that whole complication of, well, this doesn't describe everything, but there's that push and pull, right? That like most researchers probably would be okay with filling in metadata fields if there's just a few and they're general enough. And maybe that's good enough to capture some metadata, at least to start with. But ideally, of course, you have like a perfect schema that has, all of the little details and is perfectly crafted. But we thought, let's just try to iterate on this a little bit and just start with the most basic thing. Because if you want, you could go into the DataCite kind of web UI if you're like a really pro user and start adding even more metadata fields to these items. But it's probably likely the case that 90% of the people that will use this fruit inventory will just need kind of, let's say 10, 15 fields to at least register like the base amount of data. And this is just to show that the system administrator can easily set up this integration and can also set it up on a test version of the server. But this screen is only seen by the system admin. So the idea is that users really don't need to see anything. And what was interesting with this project is that we did publish like a guideline where we explain in detail the conversations we had with the institution, the actual use cases they presented to us. So things like when I have a metadata field, might be that I want to set up like an embargo policy of when a field will actually go public, or I might want to still retain the specific location of a field in the inventory system, but publicly I want to anonymize that a little bit, or I want to remove that. So, okay, that's an extra setting. And it goes into quite a lot of detail. So I'd recommend looking into that because I think there's a lot of food for thought. I mean, I'm kind of biased because I wrote like half of it, but and there's this, that was not the right button. And this webinar also kind of goes into a bit more detail into some of the things we learned. So if you're interested, you're gonna have a look. Okay, and so we came up with 4 or 5 general things we noticed while working on this project. And one of them was, as I was learning about this, I'm pretty sure like at the beginning, I thought, okay, let me just Google like PIDs DataCite and see what comes up, right? I ended up on the DataCite documentation and I learned a lot of things, which is because DataCite, I see Shelly is blushing. It's like, it's a very good resource. You have like categories, you have a search bar, like that's more than, some integrations offer. And it was interesting to see all the small communication issues and quirks that we had even between 3 different stakeholders and ones that collaborated closely. It wasn't just we sent a few emails, like we had proper calls, and we had RSpace as an integrator, we had DataSite as a provider of PID registration services, and the actual kind of interface for that. And we had institutions, and there was lots of assumptions that were made that really needed to be externalized and make it explicit. And part of the reason why the project went well, I think, is because we made sure to write up the outcomes of different conversations and making sure that those were validated by the institution, because we even ended up with things like, oh, that's all right button again. Like landing pages, like who hosts the landing pages? So we were having a chat, let's see, I think it was me and like one of the institutional people, and they were like, well, we already have landing pages for like one of our departments, but we don't have landing pages for this other department. So I'm guessing we're gonna have to make that. And I was like, yeah, that makes sense. Like it makes sense that you'd host the landing pages. And then we were talking to DataSite, and I thought, oh, well, maybe DataSite should do the landing pages because they do the PIDs registration, so that makes sense. And the answer was, well, no, that's actually not what DataSite's goal is. And it makes sense that as an integrator, since you're being the middle ground between the institution and the kind of backend, that you might want to provide a specific tool for the specific domain, so their landing pages can be customized to fit their community. And once I understood all of that, I thought, oh, okay, so we're meant to do the landing pages. We have to design the landing pages. And that was not obvious from first jumping into this, where I knew, yes, we needed to have, unique identifiers, we needed to have landing pages, so on and so on. But there's so many things that, and even language differences that really complicate the matter, even in terms of technical people talking to people who are less technical and what they mean by specific words. For example, a landing page from doing web design, for me, it's like the marketing page of a website, which is, I don't think this is the same thing. And there were questions about responsibility as well, like who actually develops the schema. We as a service provider of like an interface, we don't have domain knowledge, and it makes sense that the communities of practice or the institution should probably work on the metadata schema development together with then having DataSite implement or add that into their schema. And then we as an integrator can then start to implement that on our side, and it becomes like a full thing that was implemented. And even questions about what if you have several tools in your research process. Let's say you have something like FAMES or FieldMark that's about offline sample collection in the field. You collect samples, then you pass that onto RSpace, right? Then from RSpace, you do some work, maybe use an analysis tool. So stuff moves into the analysis tool, moves back to RSpace. Now from RSpace, it goes to like Dataverse, right? Where's the PIDs registered? Who can actually update the metadata of the PIDs? So if you mint it in RSpace and you publish to Dataverse, should FieldMark have the most up-to-date data? Or is it like, now it's like past data? Like it became this big thing that we ended up kind of simplifying and reviewing, but there's so many things I think that only come to the surface when you start looking at a specific institution and a specific PID and their specific kind of details, and start realizing that there's a lot of questions that come up that might not come up in these kind of more general conversations. This is just a really interesting paper that I found. It's the IGSN 2040 technical model. And what I like about it is that it categorizes responsibilities. So I'm not going to go through all of this, but let's say, try to kind of categorize what DataSite had as a role in RSpace and so on. But let's say you have the vocabulary, right? So, no, actually, I'll see. Resolver. Okay, yeah, here, landing pages. So we as a hoster of landing pages, we should provide the landing page with some machine readable headers so that it's all kind of crawlable and so on. And the data side, what they provide is the ability to, use the DOI link and then for that to redirect to RSpace. So that's like a separate responsibility here. And then DataSite actually also plays the role of providing the search interface and the aggregation of all of these DOIs. And so you can imagine that there can be another organization that focuses, say, specifically on biological samples, and they provide their own indexing system that's based on, let's say, taking all the pages from RSpace and their headers and providing, let's say, different search categories based on this domain. Like maybe you don't want to use a very generic search, maybe you want to use a specific search, and in some other cases it's the other way around. And then finally, you also have the users that use, let's say, RSpace to enter their data. So that role is the actual sample search portal or service as well. Like if, let's say, you're working inside of inventory and you need to search that information internally. So this looks a bit complicated, but once you actually go for it step by step, it's really well described. But there's this idea that I don't think sometimes responsibilities are very clearly, explicitly stated. So it's useful to have those conversations to better understand how this would work within a specific context in your institution. This is just an example of the various kind of diagrams we made to try to understand, okay, who mints the IGSN, who hosts the landing page, should that be the same entity? Should that not be the same entity? I mean, like in an ideal kind of computer science, like nicety version, you would have all of these different tools that could ping back to DataSite and update the data individually. And then all of these tools go to pull all the data and everything would be versioned and everything would be really nice and accessible. And you would always know that you're viewing the latest version. But in practice, it's a lot harder than that. So yeah, there's a lot of things to work with, especially since you might be using a lot of different tools as well. And yeah, that was I think a good kind of that first point. The reason why I stayed quite well on it is that I think it exemplifies well why we need something like a PIDs exchange and why we need case studies and examples and just even examples of what should you think about when you're doing this kind of work. I know that, for example, the different integrations and the different tools we looked at, it was for browsing their documentation and having actual calls with people from these places that was really useful. But it's hard to have calls with everyone, especially as an institution, if you're building something and having to have that one-to-one communication, and actually then like there's no explicit documentation of all of these conversations. And so we're trying, for example, to share our use case by publishing that report and explaining what we thought about it and what decisions we took. But it's actually none of this is like these kind of best practices, they're not really documented. And so whenever an institution approaches this, I mean, I can imagine they're kind of in a similar situations to me where they just have to start somewhere, but it's not, there's a lot to do, basically. That's what I'm trying to say. Yeah, and I think it's important to focus on use cases. What do the researchers need in this situation? What do the research data managers need? Detailed interviews, because that makes sure that you have a concrete spec that you can problem solve with an implementation that can be iterative, and then making sure to verify that. That's just kind of common design methodology. And reusing existing metadata frameworks, I think is really good. We had a lot of talks about metadata standards, and there's no reason not to just find ways to reuse those, such as, for example, being able to import an ontology and then generate a template from that. And reusing metadata elements, I think my point of view would be that sometimes it's better just to have some metadata than to have, perfect metadata. So as long as it's kind of reusable and easier for you to implement, that might be good enough for now, rather than kind of really trying to get every single field very customized and very perfect. also using open infrastructure, right? So a lot of the conversations ended up being around other PIDs and related identifiers. So we were talking about, okay, so in our space, we should probably have the institution information, and well, actually RORs have the institutional information. So the system administrator should just be able to, set up on the server that this our space instance, because we have separate servers for each institution, they can just add a ROR and attach it, make sure that it's the correct one. And then automatically, whenever someone publishes an IGSN or in the future, like DOIs or any other work, the ROR is automatically added to the metadata. Researchers can add their ORCID as well in our space. So then automatically the creator affiliation field in DataCite can be populated automatically. So basically avoiding metadata duplication and reusing existing PIDs as much as possible. Let me see. Yeah, and this is also, I've seen quite a common topic at the conference, the idea of disciplinary communities and defining best practices. And there was a lot of conversations with the institutions of which metadata fields to use, how to use them, whether to make them strict, not make them strict. And even between the two institutions there were quite a few differences and quite a few similarities. And a big one was definitely the onboarding and support for researchers on how to actually use their schemas. And I think this, the onboarding and support work can be something that can be a shared resource because it definitely takes a lot of work to explain PIDs and explain metadata in a way that is understandable and intuitive. And I think that's definitely something that, like, if the researcher doesn't input the metadata, then like that's it. Like there's not going to be the metadata there, right? Like, you have all the other steps that also need to work, but that's really the initial step. And I guess having an open conversation on, well, how much are we willing to compromise in terms of the how structured should it be? Like maybe it's fine if there's a bunch of unstructured metadata, at least it's recorded, and then maybe the data curator can refine and iterate on that metadata. And so that means that the integrator should support like a curation tool, and having that kind of ability to view the different metadata, like view a dashboard of the actual metadata that's being used in the fields, and then being able to review that metadata and edit it. So those capabilities are also something we're looking at. Yes, that was, I think this slide, I think, is the best way to end things. Yeah, I think I learned a lot through this project for sure. And it was really nice to work with DataCite. They're pretty cool. They do like PIDs and stuff. You should like look them up. And yeah, so this is, okay, yeah, I use these, as you can see, I use these slides for something else, but this is the session we're currently in, so that's fine. You're in the right place, and that's my email. Feel free to get in touch. I'll be around. If I'm on my phone or something, I probably just like glazed over, so don't worry, I'm not busy. Yeah, and I'd love to hear what you think, and I hope this gives a good example of the kind of learning process and all the hurdles that have to be overcome to even just do what could be considered like the simplest version of like an point-to-point integration that works. So hopefully we can start building something cool together. Thank you very much.
Hello, it's working. Okay, so if you're not in our interest group yet, I would invite you to join us, but that's the kind of nitty-gritty conversation we have in our group. It's not for everyone, but if your role is to going into how to actually implement PIDs and PID workflows in your tool platform, this really are the conversation you want to have. And we want to have this early, we want to have this together, and we want to provide what we come up with for the wider community so they can, ask the right question, know where are the right places to look at when they're, actually want to put this into practice. So introduce myself. I'm Charlie Chen. I'm with DataCite, and I lead a project called Implementing Fair Workflows. And I'm co-chairing this group because in the Implementing Fair Workflows project, we do a lot of integration with our partner organizations that provide services and platforms that caters to research activities across the research lifecycle, not just at the end of it. So a lot of people, when they talk about PIDs or DOIs, they kind of think of, putting a DOI on the end result of a research project or a cycle process. So like the articles, journal articles get a DOI at the end of the project. Data set get deposited in the data repository at the end of the project. But like in Fair Workflows, we look at the entire research lifecycle from the very beginning, like the applying for a project grant, coming up with a project proposal, and drawing up your data management plan, writing down your planned experiments in presentations, stuff like that. So why is this interesting is because we are quite familiar with integrating PID workflows in repositories, in journal publishing platforms. These are quite standard at this point, but we kind of are moving this process upstream a little bit because outputs are being shared, interim outputs are being shared throughout the research process, not just in the middle. So there are more research tools being used where outputs, interim outputs are produced that researchers seek to share as they are doing their research. So, and this kind of introduces this sort of new dynamic for how this PID play into this process. So like this, what Vida just present is like a great example of how new this is. And we work through a lot of, like iterations and kind of like a introduction, educational process, and then like testing process and like very long process, kind of to get to where we are, which we thought would be a quite straightforward integration. But luckily we had this support of this small grant where we write down our lessons learned, and I think this should be a good conversation starter to engage people in the room, people on Zoom who wants to, join us and continue this. Okay, this one. So I just want to very briefly, from the project perspective, from DataCite perspective, how we look at this. So what we were talking about when we were talking about interoperability. So there are the interoperability between PID systems, and there are the interoperability between tools. And interoperabilities have always been the center of conversation whenever you're talking about open infrastructures, obviously. And in terms of interoperability between PIDs, we're talking about the metadata schema that supports connection metadata, like linkage between different types of PIDs, and also like this common information exchange model that aggregate and expose linkage metadata across platforms. And then on top of that, you have the integration operability between tools, where you have this seamless cross-platform data management workflow, and that facilitate metadata creation, enrichment, and reuse. And both of this will have to happen in order for the research tools to tap into the connected metadata, the PID graph, what we call it, to demonstrate the value of open and fair research back to the researchers community. The former is in place, and there are a lot of work to be done in the latter, where we work with organizations to implement integrations with PID systems. And when it comes to PID integration, there are like many different roles integrators may play. Sometimes it's clear, sometimes not so much. So it's beneficial for all parties to clarify this from the beginning, as Vida painstakingly emphasized several times. So like there I made this categorization from like our experience in the project, but you tell me, people in the room, whether this makes sense to you. We have the PID metadata publisher, and these are the organizations and platforms that are responsible for the resources and directly create metadata and register PIDs for them. And then there are the metadata contributors. These are organization platforms that generate valuable metadata about resources and wish to contribute to the PID graph, which is like publicly accessible pool of metadata about scholarly resources, but do not directly register PIDs. And then we also have PID metadata consumers, and these are organizations and platforms that harvest or aggregate or query PID metadata to realize their own functionalities. And one organization can and usually take on multiple roles. So integrations with PID systems, they can be between publishers and PID systems. They can be between consumers and PID systems. And then we have like the third-party integrations that is between either publishers and contributors, or contributors to consumers, or consumers to publishers. Any of these directions can happen. And this type of categorization, I put it like this, is because this would involve quite different stakeholders and conversations and processes. So what does it mean for these tools? There are three aspects of it. One is the direct register and the maintenance of PIDs for research outputs produced and hosted on your platform. What does it mean? Like you actually are responsible for these things. Like the metadata needs to be accurate, it needs to be up to date. Sometimes it's not the case. The second aspect is like to ingest PID metadata to provide evaluating functionalities like discoverability across platforms and enhancement of usabilities, except for example, like autocomplete input fields and suggesting related outputs, such type of functionalities. And then there is the contributing metadata to PID registering platform through system integration aspect of it, where you can append new connection metadata, like, for example, like data to DMP linkage, data to article linkage, etc. So, so an example from the Fair Workflow project. So it shows like different integrations we take on within the project. This looks messy, but it's already a simplified version of it. So all of these platforms plug into DataSite to either create or enrich or contribute or harvest metadata from and to DataSite infrastructure. And they talk to each other in various different ways to exchange information and make sure all of these outputs that is generated and shared through these platforms are identified and fairly available in the community. So we also, write up our integration experience in reports and blog posts that you're welcome to check out. These are ongoing, so we'll be continuous to share more insights from the project. But integrating PID workflows is not without challenges. These are some of the example challenges we've observed. They're very highly varied use cases across different platforms, and they are like resourcing and prioritization is always in the conversation. Usually research tools are maintained by small teams and they all have competing priorities. And it's very hard to estimate workload. And this is partially because we're all not on the same level of understanding of how infrastructure works and or PIDs workflows work. So it's important to find alignment between systems with varying level of PID integration, and need more benchmark integrations that we can put out and as examples and say, okay, if you want to do this, that is how much work it requires. And then also, last but not least, very, very important is engagement with the researchers community. You provide research tools and you want researchers to use them. That is that should be goes without saying, but sometimes we lose sight. So, so it's important to engage with them and raise awareness of what these features, how they help them, and to involve them in usability testings. Right, so that was the end of my presentation. And at this point, do we have questions about all of this, the talks so far? From the room and from Zoom? No one? Very quiet.
I'm here. I'm here. So,
yes.
yeah, I had a comment about the presentation on the R space integration. One of the things that, I know no metadata is ever perfect, but one of the things to look forward to is thinking about integrating some of the indigenous data sovereignty information into the sampling platform. You've already got the location information, and local context is in the process of adding GIS information into their platform. So I think, and I know they've done some work with DataSite on integrating that into their metadata. So I think that's something you can kind of put on your board for something to look at in the future. I think you've made it easy for people to at least know that they're on indigenous lands and kind of add labels in to say, hey, we need to pay attention. So that's my comment.
There's no.
Thank you. That's great to know. We'd love to hear more about that. So maybe we could chat afterwards. Or thank you. Yep. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. And yeah, one thing we've been working on as well is support for ontologies and vocabularies, and it makes a lot of sense to kind of just, again, pull from existing things and allow assignment of metadata fields to specific ontology terms to, again, maintain those links. So that makes perfect sense.
Yes, next, please.
Sure. This is, I mean, about the content, but it might be going ahead. I like this idea of the common information exchange model as like looking at that interoperability. And I'm wondering if there's been any thought of kind of how to maybe use the FDO hourglass model or something like that, where on the bottom you'll have, ORCID, ROAR, data set, all these things, but on the top you have services like data site or research equals, and in the middle you might have this kernel. So the FDO idea is that you have an ID, but then the metadata record has a type. And so the idea is there might be this common information exchange model where you just resolve a PID, whether it's a DOI or or whatever, and then you'll see the type. Oh, this is supposed to be an ORCID metadata model, and like there's this sort of common information exchange. And I'm wondering if that sort of, I would expect that's where this would go. This working with PIDs, because we don't want the system integration challenges that has plagued traditional software for decades, and have it seems like FAIR and PIDs could play a role here. So I'm wondering kind of about that, your thoughts on progress on a common information exchange model among PIDs to not have to have this direct integration.
I know there are work going on doing that from the FAIR course for EOSC projects. Yes, we will definitely have that conversation, but in terms of integration, VITA have more.
May I answer that question, actually?
Right. Oh, yeah.
Hi.
Yeah, please.
So I'm Tommi Suominen. I'm the coordinator for the FAIR Core for EOSC project. So actually, what we are working on there are the kernel information profiles for different PID systems for the metadata. And what we're working on is the development of a PID meta resolver, where basically you can put any type of a PID in, and it will either return you the metadata of that object, or it can resolve to the object. And we're looking at options into content negotiation as well to get metadata in different formats like JSON or XML, RDF, whatever. So this is in the pipeline. We're working on developing this, and the first version of this should be coming out end of next month.
Thank you very much. I mean, I think where that could be directly applicable is rather than your product integrating IGSN, it would just integrate
Everything.
This protocol that IGSN would use, DataSite would use. Everyone would do that, and template generation. So that's
Yeah, no, of course, that makes sense as like an end goal, right? But I think it's useful to have that step of just trying out like non-exchange format just to even figure out, okay, how is this even used, and is what is common between them, right? So it's almost like a prototype phase. And once I think we have a bit more maturity in, let's say, several IGSN integrations, and we can see, okay, well, actually, this is all pretty standard. Okay, this links well with how DOIs are used as well, and we can make sense of that. But I think it's, yeah, it's both user research in terms of which of these should be part of the exchange. And yeah, so yeah, that makes sense. That is a good kind of ideal to work towards and keep in mind in the actual practical implementation.
Okay, hope that answers the question. Next, please.
I don't know if it's related to the last question, but I was sort of wondering about this idea of enriching the PID with more metadata after its initial publication. It's a very practical thing that we encounter at our institution. For example, someone publishes in Zenodo, there is no related publication yet because the publication typically comes afterwards. But then in the CRIS system, they register their Zenodo publication, and at that point, they add more metadata in the CRIS system, but not in the repository where it was initially published. And I've always wondered if there's any opportunity to have that enrichment also go to the DOI metadata, because sure, it goes through to aggregators like OpenAir and such, but I find it such a shame that that information is not present with the data side metadata basically of the DOI. Has there ever been any sort of brainstorming on that? Because I realize it's probably difficult with authority, who has the authority to change the metadata. But yeah, that was my question, kind of.
A comment? Sure. Sure.
So that particular problem of not having to is one of the main motivations behind RAID, which is a research activity identifier, which is a project level identifier. And the idea there is that RAID metadata, you get a single identifier, which is almost certainly going to be a DOI. We're working on with DataCite and the DOI Foundation and others on that now. It's going to be essentially it's project level, so it has all the inputs and outputs from a project, and the idea is that it evolves over time. So when like you may use a data set as an input, you might change it, it might also be an output, that's fine. You can have those DOIs as people come and go, organizations come and go, new publications come out. It keeps that record history to facilitate both sort of the transparency of the project and the long-term tracking of what happens with the sort of outcomes from various inputs. Like if you win a grant, often the grant reporting window closes, whatever, 18 months, 2 years after the grant ends. But, you know, I had grants in the 2000s that we're still publishing, you know, off of the field data from. So, you know, that's you know, I don't know that this entirely solves your problem, but I would also say just briefly that RAID is essentially it keeps some basic project metadata, but it's basically a basket of other PIDs and is designed to be interoperable with, you know, DataCite, Crossref, ORCID, the rest right from the beginning. And we're working with all those other providers to ensure that.
Yeah, I think it covers a really important part, but it's, for example, also something we see with that we have more mandatory fields than the DataCite model. So they add metadata fields that weren't at the initial publication of the data set, but that gets lost because it's only in the CRIS system. So RAID solves the issue when there are linked outputs, which I think is probably the most important additional information, but we also see it with new metadata fields and such.
You mean metadata fields that are not on the dataset schema?
They are there, but they're not mandatory.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, so then we encourage everyone to put on those recommended and optional fields whenever they're available, obviously.
Yeah, but what I mean is like currently for it to arrive at the DOI metadata, they would
Mhm.
have to return to your initial repository to enrich it there, which they never do.
Yeah, I just have one small comment. I think making use of like related identifiers is good here because I'm guessing depending on the type of output, it's more or less likely to change. There's maybe like an analysis data set, you put it into Dataverse, and I mean that's it. Like that's what happens, right? But let's say if you have a physical sample, you're maybe still kind of analyzing it. You might add more to it. So one thing we did brainstorm was that what happens when you try to input analysis of a sample into Dataverse? How do you track those samples? And what makes the most sense is to have a custom metadata field in that export that has the actual DOIs to those samples. And those DOIs could be published on RSpace, and that enables quick publishing and updating of those samples. So you would have the latest version of the samples, and the actual Dataverse wouldn't have to be updated for that because it's simply linking to the place that does have the latest up-to-date information. So that's what we were thinking, but obviously work in progress.
Okay, thank you for the question. Okay, I don't see a question from Zoom as well. So yeah, so I would like to usher us into the interactive part of this session, just so we don't fall asleep at this afternoon hour. I have a Mentimeter poll for us to kind of get an initial idea. 1 second, sorry. Where is it? For the PID Exchange, which is, as the title described, a curated information sources for PID adopters and integrators. So this is supposed to be the idea, I think, is a one-stop shop for everyone to get the most useful information that you can directly feed into your work plan. So if our tech can give us the screen from me, from the Zoom, then I can show this. Oh, how does this work? Wait. Not sure what's happening. Is it showing up? No. Yes, okay. So yeah, you can get into the Menti through this instructions. And if you're in there, give it a thumb up so we see on the screen how many people are on there. This is for people here and on Zoom. Okay, still have people coming in. And okay, I go into the first poll. So I just kind of illustrated the 3 categories of PID metadata roles. Are you the publisher or contributor or consumer here? If I want to get a sense of which group is most represented here. Okay. Okay, that's stabilized. That's actually quite evenly distributed than I expected, but that's good. I wonder if it's because most of us are like all 3 or multiple roles. Yeah, okay, that's good to know. And the next one is if we're going to build such a resource, we don't want to build from scratch. What existing trusted useful resources, information, formats that you, through your experience, are already out there? Give us examples. Yes, that's a documentation is wonderful. Local dataset consortium. Support organization like from the PID organizations, you mean, and W33 recommendations, DMP tool. Okay, that's the platform. ROR Crossref. We're just naming things now. Okay. The Turing way is actually quite a good one. Okay. You can't just name a thing because we don't know which specific information resource you're talking about. So like encourage the answer to be a little bit more specific. That's helpful, and URL. Okay. Yeah, plenty of mention of data site. Love that. Moving on to the next question. So as an integrator or adopter, which of the following methods of engagement is most useful? You can rank these. Are this a direct liaison with PID infrastructure organizations? Like when you want to integrate, you directly shoot us email and say, how do I do this in your experience? And also open wikis where everybody can contribute to the topics and do Q&As, forum, or the knowledge hub type website or mailing lists. Okay. Okay, that's a that's a no-no for mailing lists. Thank you for the input, and I move to our last thing, which is really is a meat of what our discussion today is that if we want to build a PID exchange, we want to brainstorm some key topics and what should be included. And so like, obviously, we want to include everything, but we want to have a set of topics collected, and after the session, obviously we'll parse through it, do the prioritization and categorization. But we can also do it here, but depend on time, maybe we don't have time for that. But here in the room, I encourage us to take some time to write those down. I have a bunch of like the notes, post-its. You can either write on post-its or write on this, depends on how analog you are. Yeah, I will give it 10 minutes and then we come back and look at the results.
Found it interesting, the one point there that was made of like, why PIDs and not URIs, right? And I mean, the way I understand it is PIDs kind of are just URIs with like some standardization. Like, would you agree with that? Or do you think, have I opened a can of worms here?
Daniel, do you want to comment on that? I think it's apparently imperative that we include this question in the PID exchange. Yeah, why PIDs? Where do I start? PID is part of a open infrastructure that kind of give access, and I'm not doing this right. I hope someone in the audience can help with this.
Yeah, what do you think is the difference between PIDs and URIs?
There are a whole load of practical differences between them. I mean, a PID functions as a URI. It looks like it structurally, but they are tied to a governance mechanism. So you use it in the place of the URI. So if your domain name changes, you change your repository platform and the syntax of your URI shifts, that will still point to the original thing. The whole point of the PID being separated from the conventional navigation and having that resolver mechanism behind it is it means that you can change URIs, but those PID links will be persistent. That's the persistent component of it. And you have a governance mechanism there. So if the resource disappears, somebody can tombstone it, somebody can maintain a record of it having existed and why it ceased to exist. Just on a really simple practical level, those are some of the differences, I think, between a PID and a standard URI. I think probably loads of people in the room would add comments to that, but I'm not seeing any other hands.
I think I fully agree that if a PID is not well maintained, then a PID is not better as a URL. So the difference is that you should maintain PIDs so that they always point to the right location. If you do not do this, then it is the same as URL. So therefore, I think the governance and the structure of maintaining this kind of information is very important.
Yeah, I think we're at time for 10 minutes, maybe like 30 seconds left, but this is incredible. I was just going through all of this inputs and topics. These are the burning questions from the community, and that's exactly what the PID Exchange is trying to tackle, giving answers to, like, direct answers to the questions that that integrators need. Yeah, you wanna?
I was just going to say, do we want to, it's a great conceptual idea, and this is a great example of why, but do we want to talk about what kind of structures or spaces or whatever you want to call them we might try as a community to develop to enable discussions to take place on an ongoing basis, in addition to, not as opposed to, but in addition to at meetings like RDA? In other words, what would the PID exchange, what form might it take? What would it look like?
If our tech can go back to our slide instead of sharing screen. Yes. There's the remote.
Johnny, did you go ahead? Yep.
Yeah, I mean, like one thing that just is related directly to that Mentimeter survey, like lower on the list is forum. I believe like DataCite has the, PIDforum.org, could potentially be this, but it obviously hasn't, been that. And so maybe a step up from that is kind of like a wiki kind of collaborative thing. And then above that is the knowledge base. But again, it sounds like we want it to be amenable to feedback. So sort of more wiki contributor like. I think that could be something based on the poll of what people thought they'd find interesting.
Yeah, if you have strong feelings about what format it should take, I think wiki type is really nice. And I also think we also already have a quite like established wiki basis. I think the thing is right now a lot of these resources are very scattered, and it's not that they're not out there. It's just not organized in a nice comprehensive way that is easy for people to, walk through and find the right, correct information that they're looking for. So.
Yeah, it was interesting. I think when there were the four ranked things, and mailing list was fourth.
Yeah.
But the second one was reach out to a PIDs provider like DataSite, that's really the only option now, the only practical option. That's what people think of. But the question is, could there be a more comprehensive option where people can get less scattered answers? That's what we're looking for, right?
Yeah. Daniel, do you want to?
No, I was just wondering, yeah, the platform will depend very much on the scope of the questions that want to be asked and answered on the platform. So I'm not sure what capabilities RDA has in that regard, but I think we'd be looking at something that's broader, or the ideas at least for it at the moment are broader than that.
Yeah, I mean, resourcing for this resource is very important. Where to host it, who should be hosting it, what kind of task force, how we can put together. Right now, we have this working interest groups, and we are together, this people in the room together. We can, starting from this list of topics we gathered today, and we will share this as a document to everyone in the interest group, and we can, work on this, make it into a more succinct starting point, and continue this information. Next RDA, we're going to come back and and share the progress, because this is going to be ongoing.
Yeah, so I'm just thinking, I think the resources issue is key, because if it's too much to do on a voluntary, if it's going to be done properly, it's hard to see it happening just on a purely voluntary basis. There should be some kind of group which is going to work on it and which has some support. So I don't know, RDA potentially could provide that, I guess. I don't quite know. This RDA Tiger, if we did something with the RDA, perhaps in conjunction with the groups, maybe we could get some support from kind of administrative and organizational support from RDA Tiger to do that. I don't know if that's possible, but it's something we could explore. I noticed a couple of people have joined the working group today, which is fantastic. Welcome. If anyone is specifically interested in thinking about how to get a PID exchange together, why don't you contact us through the groups or individually or whatever, and we could see if there's enough interest of putting together a little task force somehow to continue thinking about these ideas and maybe how to best to move them forward.
Yeah, I just want to highlight John and Adam in the Zoom chat pointing out that mailing lists are incredibly important tool for community building, even though they might not always necessarily help as much as actual documentation or integration pieces. And Adam says, anyone who doesn't have email as a first isn't living in the real world. Yeah, this is why that was a ranking exercise, not, only choosing. It's like, we're not abandoning any of these methods. It's just prioritizing which we should be focusing on first.
Yeah, I mean, when I go into my email and I see the mailing list information about an event, or like an informational event, or something to do with, oh, we've created a resource, then that's how I get to the next stage of talking to the actual provider, or like actually accessing that information. So I think it's kind of interlinked a little bit.
Okay. So yeah, well, I think we have achieved the goal of this session quite spectacularly. I love it. I love all of this feedback, and we'll definitely be going back to that and following up with everyone. And that follow-up is going to go through the mailing list. So join the group so you'll get the follow-up. And we will give you back 3 minutes head start to the coffee break. Is that okay? Okay. Thank you so much, everyone, for showing up and your input. And thank you all of the contributors from our both of our interest groups.